So when I say Western States 100-mile run, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
I have a mental picture of the trail, probably somewhere on Red Star Ridge, just looking off into the Granite Chief Wilderness.
How about from an experience standpoint?
Well, pain.
So let's go back to the very beginning. So you ran the race for the first time in 1978.
I did.
How did you find out about the race and what compelled you to sign up?
It was very simple. I had just moved out from from New York to California, and I had taken the job as vice president and general manager of Runner's World.
Oh, okay.
And that was a strange place. I stayed there for a year and then moved on. But our marketing director was a wonderful character named Phil Linehan, and he was also a runner. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting in my office one day, and I heard someone excitedly saying, "Doug, Doug, Doug," and I heard running footsteps coming down the corridor. And here was Phil, and he had just been out in the back room where the editorial staff was working, and he had galley proofs of the next issue of Runner's World. And he said, "Doug, look at this, and he showed me a spread that was Red Star Ridge with 2 horses and 2 runners on it in the first edition of the Western States Run. There were, I think, 13 or 11 runners. And Phil said, "Doug, we gotta do this, And I have to admit that it looked really exciting, but I thought it was 100 miles in the Sierras, kind of, a challenge. I didn't think anything more about it. And about 2 weeks later, Phil came running down to my office and he said, "Doug, I entered us both."
He took care of it for you. Wow.
Yeah.
So you sign up for the race in 1978 with Phil,
Yep.
and now you go in there and you end up top 5.
Yeah, it was interesting because none of us, except for probably Gordy and Andy Gonzalez and a few other people, had ever run up here. But so we didn't train for it. I went out and did some long run walks, 30 miles up on roads, and was not prepared for, the steep pitches and the rocky trails.
So you being a publisher and a writer, I was reminded of this story a couple of days ago that after that race, there was an article on Western States in Playboy.
Yes, there was.
I need the story of how you guys got an article about the Western States and you and Jim battling it out into as something like Playboy.
Well, we didn't get it in. There was a very good writer who wrote for a lot of magazines who was a friend of mine, another Western States runner from Southern California. And he had done an article on the race the previous year. I've forgotten who published it, probably Runner's Magazine. But he was there that year as well, and he wrote the article. And I knew he was writing an article, didn't know who it was for. And he interviewed me before the race and then afterward. And he also walked up the hill to the Green Gate with me.
Oh, nice.
And asked me how I was doing. And he said, I told him I was doing pretty terribly. That was the prior year, the year I collapsed at Green Gate. He walked up to Green Gate, and I told him I was doing terribly. He said, "Can't you pull out all the stops?" And I said, "Lee, I pulled out all the stops about 35 miles ago."
Yeah, like I say, you were kind of a late starter. You were 37 when you started, but your best years at Western States when you were in your 40s.
Yeah. Well, I improved all my PRs into my mid-40s, and that was
that's a
then I peaked.
and
now I don't
a tough hill to climb.
Yeah.
So I don't, I'm going to fast forward a little bit to 1988 now. So you're going for your 10th finish. You can be the first runner to finish the race 10 times. There's a little bit of pressure there, even though you may not know, you're like, I'm not going to win the race because I'm not at the level by which I could compete to the front.
I beg your pardon.
But you want to say, but being in the top 10 is really, at the award ceremony, they recognize the top 10 men and the top 10 women, and that's kind of the elite pack within Western States. Yeah. Yet now you're 50 years old, right?
Yeah.
And so you're, mixing it up with the fast guys up front. I mean, it's not, you're not the 100th in the race or anything, but so you get on that race and you just, on that day, you set the course record for men 50 and over, and that record stood for more than 30 years. I've talked to people a lot of course records on Western States. I said, you have to realize that you do that 100 miles and there's probably not a mile on there where you're feeling very bad. That, you know, if you're going to run a course record on that course, you really have to be in your groove most of the day. There might be a pothole here that's almost guaranteed in 100 miles, but they're very short-lived, and at the end of it, you just realize, wow, you know, I might not have been thinking I was doing a course record, but that really was smooth. Is that really what you felt that day? Because I mean, when you think of that record lasting for more than 30 years before it just got broken in 2019, and you did that in 1988, and on your 10th finish, to get your 10th year buckle, being the first 1,000-mile buckle winner.
Well, I don't want to sound cocky, but I kind of took for granted that I would get my 10th buckle because I wasn't going to, you know, have all my muscles cramp again. So I was at that time eating and drinking the right things. But I had a very, very intense goal to get 10 top finishes as a master.
So the Western States Run starts in Squaw Valley and ends in Auburn. It's a 100-mile trail that's been around for, you know, decades.
Probably hundreds and thousands of years with the Indians. So,
exactly,
you know.
They were the original users. Then you had the Tevis Cup ride come along that kind of made it famous, and then becomes a run. What's the terrain like? So you start out at Squaw Valley. Obviously, that's the start of the Olympics, and I've always thought that was the most intimidating start ever. When you drive up into Squaw Valley and you just look at this giant cirque in front of you, and you're like, well, how do I get out of here? Yeah. Well, you see that tram that goes up 2,500 feet? Yeah, that's where you start, right up there. So, what's it like out there on the trail itself?
Well, the scenery is spectacular. You're right. When you get to Squaw Valley and you look up at Emigrant, and it's like this, it's 4.5 miles, and you think to yourself, God, you get up there, you still got 95 miles and a half to go. But it's beautiful, and the part going up to Immigrant is steep. It's not, it's pretty, but it's not spectacularly beautiful because it's a ski area. But it's interesting, and then you get to the top, and you go to the Granite Chief Wilderness, and you're out there with all these incredible granite crags and cliffs and streams. They're full of little tiny trout. You see bears, you see rattlesnakes. I've seen mountain lion footprints in the snow when I was running up there in the winter, spring. And it's just gorgeous. Everything's pristine. It's beautiful. And the terrain varies from, you know, running along in the open over rough rock. These are not groomed trails like they have in parks. These are very rough trails. Go through deep, dark forests where you know, even in daylight it's dark and mysterious. And all the way along, you have to be careful because there are rocks, there are ruts. You can easily trip and fall. In fact, I don't think I ever made the race without falling at least once. And one year, some radio guy at Robinson Flat, someone told me later, the radio guy was saying, "Here comes Doug Latimer, and he's covered with blood. There's no way he can continue." I was covered with blood, but you know, that happens. You just keep going.
The race has evolved quite a bit from being, you know, 14 guys that just found about it from Runner's Magazine, and now it's, you know, there's thousands of people don't get into the race. give me an idea what the aid stations were like in the early days when you started out in, 78, and then you know what they're like today.
I do,
and
yeah.
What was it like, the aid station experience?
Well, it's a huge transition, and I go back and forth on it because both extremes are good. The first year in 78, if my memory is correct, there were only 9 aid stations, which is still a lot. It's 100 miles. That means almost every 10 or 11 miles is going to be a checkpoint where you can get refreshed and stuff. But the aid stations were nowhere near what they are today. They might have had water and erg or something in the old days, but you had a choice of 2 or 3 drinks, and a lot of them didn't have food. The first aid station in 78 was at Red Star Ridge. And it was a heavy snow year, and in those days we didn't have a snow course, which is one thing I don't approve of.
And that's 16 miles, right? So that's
16 miles. Deep, deep, deep snow. And here was Wendell Roby wearing boots up to here with a snowmobile with a bucket of water and a ladle. And he said, "Hey, Latimer, you want some water?" And I said, "Sure." So he handed me the ladle, and I drank it, a cup, and put it back in. And thanks, Wendell, and I ran on.
1 ladle per runner.
They only had 1 bucket from the 69 people coming through, so
Sure.
probably, yeah.
Sure.
But, just one guy standing in the snow with hip boots and a bucket. In those days it was elemental. It was just you, and it was the trail and the mountains. It's good that the runners have support, and it's nice to come into a checkpoint where you can have anything from potato soup to apple pie to probably a Mai Tai if you look around for
Pizza.
it. Pizza, yeah. And it's much safer that way because you could have a serious accident out there. In fact, the safety improvements are really good. But it's become a totally different race now. It's an international race. It's known all over the world. It takes 8 or 10 years to get into it these days. There was no lottery then. If you applied, you got in. There are like 18 or 20 aid stations now, and much better offerings at them.
It's funny, I was saying, somebody said a long time when they added a few aid stations, like, the idea isn't here to run from a picnic basket to picnic basket. You got to go out there and take care of yourself.
Yeah,
yeah. The thing that's really developed over the years is, when you think about it, and you still a runner, is shoes and packs and socks and gear. And
there are 2 things that I innovated, and neither of them have been widely adopted.
There's always hope.
One, which I'm sure is not going to make the final cut of your video, is that it occurred to me after one race that you pee a lot during the race if you're hydrated. And so next time I went out on a trail run down home, I stopped to pee and I timed myself. It took about 30, 40 seconds. And I thought to myself, how many times do you pee in Western states? And I think probably, maybe 15 times at least. That's 7.5 minutes. So I invented the moving pee.
That's a mile's worth of time.
Absolutely. That could be the critical difference in a close race. So I learned how to pee while moving. You have to do it going uphill while you're walking, but if you're very careful, you can do it without messing yourself up.
That takes a little practice.
It does, and you can't do it with any women anywhere around. But the other thing, which is a great innovation, the first year I ran, my toenails began to hurt in Duncan Canyon. And by the time I was at Robinson Flat, I had already torn off 2 or 3 of them, because going downhill, your toes, at least my toes, always hit the front of my shoe, and it would just lift a little tiny bit. So it was like the Chinese water torture, or not water torture, bamboo under the nails torture, little by little by little, and over the course of the run, I would lose 3 or 4 toenails, and it's excruciatingly painful. So after having this happen 3 or 4 years, I finally said, what would happen if I just cut off that much of the top of my shoe, leaving the side on, but not the top? And I tried it out at home, and it worked really well. People think you're going to get a lot of pebbles in your shoe, but you don't. They don't pop in, and if they do, all you have to do is on your next step, you lift your foot in the air and pull your toes up, and you flip it like that, and they come right back out again. So I never lost a toenail after about the 3rd year, but I could never talk anybody else into doing it.
The toeless shoe.
Yeah, the toeless shoe. Wendell was an old-time pioneer. I think in his 80s when the Western States began, was instrumental, of course, in getting the race started because it was he, I think, that Gordy went to when his horse went lame.
Him and Drew Barner.
And Drew Barner, and asked permission, and I guess Wendell and Drew both said, "Sure, Gordy, if you want to run it,
why not?
Run it." So he was the key. He got the race going, and then Shannon and Mo, I guess, ran the race for the people.
Mm-hmm.
But all I know is that he did. It was his way, and that endeared him to many people, including the runners, because he got the race going. But the Fire Service was not very fond of him for some of the things that he did, and some of the landowners were not, because I'm told, and this could be apocryphal, but I'm told that Wendell, when it was decided that we would abandon going through White Oak Flat and introduce the trail from Forest Hill down to the river, that Wendell just took his bulldozer and bulldozed the new trail through other people's property without telling them.
And there's nothing out there. In
No.
the old days when we used to run through White Oak Flat, you'd run through some neighborhoods, some
Yeah.
trails behind
Yeah.
houses, people would be out their lawn chairs and
Yeah.
their kids, and they'd be
Yeah.
putting out their own little aid station, and it was
Yeah.
kind of like maybe an hour and a half or so of fun, because
Right.
you got to see someone the whole way, whereas once you drop into Cal Street, boy, you're pretty much on your own in a single track
Totally.
for
Yeah.
a couple, 3-4 hours for sure.
Yep. No, it's
And it made the course, anytime you run on single track rather than a road, it's quite a bit more difficult.
It is, yeah.
And-
I once timed myself in some race that was flat, that was on a trail, like a cinder surface, and I was almost a minute per mile slower than I would have been on concrete or asphalt or something. It's amazing how you don't get the same rebound off the surface that you do when it's solid.
Right.
Yeah.
When Granite Chief became a wilderness area,
Right.
and you were involved with Tony Rossman,
Mm-hmm.
Tom Winter, and some others who had to go back to Washington, D.C. and meet with Congress in order to get that parcel of land available to the trail so we could continue to have both the Tevis
Right.
Cup and the Western States run on it.
We heard that the Granite Chief Wilderness had been proposed. We went to the local Forest Service people and said, we're very much in favor of this. Let's protect the trail. How can we help you? And we did a lot of publicity for it, and I can't remember what else we did, but we were very much on the side of the Granite Chief Wilderness, and I think it wrote letters to our congressmen and our senators and so forth to help bring it about. And I'm sure Tony worked on that too. Tony, as you know, was a very well-known environmental attorney, and he had terrific contacts in Congress. And so we were very happy when they announced, okay, the Granite Chief Wilderness has gone through Congress, it's a wilderness. And about 2 days later, the Fire Service called up and said, hey guys, I'm sorry you can't run there anymore because there's a rule that says no organized events in wildernesses. And our response was, well, thanks for telling us that when we were supporting it. We were upset, I think rightly, that this had never been raised before. We jointly decided that the four of us would go back to Washington to try to get Congress on our side. We did, and we spent 2 or 3 days there going around and talking to senators and congressmen, except you don't talk to senators and congressmen, you talk to their aides.
Their aides, yeah.
But because of Tony's contacts, he knew which congressmen and senators to contact. Of course, the 2 California senators we definitely contacted. And he was able to get us in to talk to their higher level aides rather than just some secretary or minor aide.
Intern.
Yeah, possibly an intern even. So we made the rounds, and frankly, it was eye-opening and frustrating because we would frequently make our case, which was a very good case. We don't damage the wilderness, so the ride sort of does because of the hoofs on the horses, but not badly. And runners just go through and can't tell we've been there. And when we'd finish our spiel, the person we were talking to would say, well, you absolutely convinced me. You're totally in the right on this. We should let you do it. But Congressman so-and-so is opposed to it, and I owe him a big favor, so I can't go against him. And that's not how it should be.
Yeah.
But in the end, we contacted the Republican senator who got on our side. And he personally called up the head of the Forest Service and said, I've got these guys here from the Western States Endurance Run and from the Tavis Cup, and they make a very good case that they should not be barred from these historic events, world fame, that have gone on for ages, and suddenly they're being told they can't continue them. There's nowhere else they can do them, so it's either there or nowhere. And he told the director of the Forest Service personally, you have two choices. You can either decide that you think this is a good idea and you can initiate it yourself and it'll be your idea, or I'm going to put through legislation and we're going to force it on you. So lo and behold, the Forest Service director, being a smart man, said, okay, I think it's a good idea, I'll endorse it. But they did impose a minimum number of runners, and that's why we can't have 10,000 people.
From then on, we got on the same page, and people talked it out.
Everything was fine.
And
totally
I think
changed.
even today, we have regular meetings with those guys
Yeah.
about the event and how it's going to be managed and all
Yeah.
that, and I think the relationship has continued to thrive.
They're all good guys. They have the same values that we do. And we love the forest and the wilderness, and so do they.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So let me end with this. You know, you've been involved in the race or around it for decades. What is your most cherished memory of the event?
You know, that's tough. The first year was just spectacular because no one had ever done it before, and except Gordy and Andy. You have no idea if you can do it at all. So it was just a wonderment, and the challenge of being out there for the first time trying to run what you thought was 100 miles. It was only 88 or whatever, but it felt like 100 for sure. So I mean, that was a spectacular year. Winning it was a highlight, but I wouldn't put that first. I think probably the year with Mo, when I finished in 23:53, would be the highlight. And the worst, the low light, was the year I had to drop out with a 40-minute lead that I was expanding on at the time that I had to drop out with all the muscle spasms.
Like I say, there's something magical when you have a run like that with a friend and you get to meet your goal, that it's kind of a shared victory between the runner and the pacer.
Yeah,
there's a
absolutely.
unwritten or unrealized bond there that's hard to describe until you've done it.
Unquestionably, the low light was when I had to drop out at the Green Gate with a 40-minute lead that I was expanding on consistently because I couldn't move anymore. I was in such pain. That was definitely the worst thing that ever happened.
Yeah, I don't know whether you had some of the same experiences I have, but we always talked about Western States as being the event that you prepare for 6 months and you run, and then you take 6 months to recover, and then you start all over again. Right after the race, you'll say, why did I do that? I'll never do that again. And then 2 weeks later, you have the application out and you're filling it out to make sure you're first in line.
I never said that after the race. I would say it many, probably thousands of times during the race, but never after. After you're done and you've completed it, you're happy. And
one of the things that happened to me quite often, particularly towards the end when I was running, I didn't think I would run the race, but I could certainly try to sneak into the top 10. I would get somewhere on the course and I'd get tremendously emotional. Just, across the top of Red Star, before you get into the real meat of the race and you're, really into the heat of the battle, and you're just up there on that ridge looking at the scenery and you're thinking about your family and how lucky you are to be capable of being able to compete in something this big. And being out on the course that day, you've done all this training, but the magic and the reward is being on the course. And like you say, it's you're not competing against someone else. You're all competing against yourselves, right? You're all in this together, trying to get to the finish line. If I could help you or you could help me, we'd be the first one to lend a hand and help you pick you up from a fall or whatnot. But did you ever feel that out there, where you're just running along and all of a sudden you just got this tremendous feeling of how lucky you were?
Yeah, usually early in the race before I was wondering how I was ever going to finish it. But yes, absolutely, I had some very emotional moments. So the most surprising to me one was in '81, the year that Jim and I tied. I was in the lead. Jim, at that point, I didn't even know he was close behind, but he was. And suddenly it hit me. I was in the lead here last year, and I was in the lead here the year before, and the first time I didn't win, I came in second, and the last time I didn't even finish. And I began to sob. I was running along and tears were running down my face and I was making sobbing noises. It was an incredible wash of emotions, and I just said, Doug, get yourself back together again. Hopefully it won't happen that way again, but if it does, you just got to deal with it, but don't think about it. I've never felt as much self-pity as I felt at that moment.
I'm just glad we were able to get you here to do this, because you have such a rich history of the race as a runner, and in being part of the organization and getting it to where it is at all. I think a lot of us have been kind of standing on your shoulders for what you brought to the sport and the race.
I don't think anybody's standing on my shoulders. I think you have broader shoulders than I do, and your accomplishments far exceed mine. But it's been wonderful to reminisce, and the race has been a tremendously important part of my life, and still is. I would think about it a lot. I've got a trunk full of memorabilia that I don't go through all the time, but occasionally I'll sit down and look through the photos and stuff. No, it's a phenomenal event. It's unique and wonderful, and it's remarkable how well it's done, how it's expanded and taken the world's imagination, not just the people in Auburn.
Yeah, I think that the best part about that is be able to share the experiences we have and let someone else have a chance and see what it's like to run that trail. You get to see things and experience things that you can't imagine until you're out there. Right,
absolutely. No, I mean, we didn't talk about encounters with wildlife, but I've had encounters with bears and cougars and rattlesnakes out there, and it's just the enormity of it when you're out there by yourself with no tracks of any kind, no people, and then suddenly you're running behind bear tracks that are that big, and once mountain lion tracks, and they were so fresh that no trace of melting or anything. They were brand new tracks, and I kept wondering if I was going to catch up to it, and I didn't, but I got to a point where the lion made a sharp right and leaped so far that it made big claw marks in the snow where it probably heard me coming behind him and had leaped off.